right, there we go. Well, thank you, Kelsey, for inviting me. I think you've got a great program going on here. Here, let me just, oops. You've got a great program going on with your window box wellness. Um, and really that's a trend that is catching on all throughout the country and we're really realizing, what the benefits are for gardening for health and wellness. So I like to start with this photo, you know, and just imagine you are a math student, you're on a college campus, and you're a little bit stressed out because you've got your math final today. As you can imagine, maybe your heart rate is is pounding, and then your mind is flooded with emotions and with all these math equations that you've memorized for your exam. But you spend a few minutes. You go up to this rooftop garden, and this garden happens to be on top of the student union at Georgia Tech. And you wander through the garden, you linger in the shade of this beautiful flowering tree, and then all of a sudden you feel a little differently. You find that your mind is clearer, maybe your blood pressure has gone down a little bit, and you feel a little bit better about taking that exam. So that just shows you the power of plants. And you don't have to be outside to realize the benefits. I know Kelsey is doing a program where people are going to be growing herbs indoors. You can realize some of the health benefits with interior plants too. And I'm going to share a few studies with you, talking about the health benefits of plants. We're seeing that there's research showing that plants in the workplace can be beneficial. And the study that we have here included two groups of people that took a time computer task. And they were doing this in a windowless room. The first group of people took the timed computer task, and there were no house plants in the room. The second group of people took this computer task, but they were surrounded by house plants around the perimeter. And they were able to measure distance, measure differences. First of all, the people that were surrounded by plants did better on the computer task. They had 12% faster reaction times. In addition, there was a difference in how they felt. They had lower blood pressure, which they measured, and they indicated that they felt more attentive on this time computer task than the group that were not exposed to houseplants. They did a study on job satisfaction of office workers. Now, this happened to be one company, and they had office workers that had similar positions, but some of them happened to be in offices that had windows. Others did not have windows in their offices. They also looked into whether these individuals had plants. So we had all combinations. Some individuals had no plants and no windows. Some people had plants with windows. And then, of course, um, there were these other combinations. Now, you don't have to understand stats. The one thing I want you to do is, look at these four categories, whether they had plants and whether they had windows, and look at the mean score. If the score was over 108, this tended to indicate that they had more job satisfaction than the individuals with less than 108. So they found, regardless of whether you had a window in your office, if you had houseplants surrounding you, you were more likely to have better job satisfaction. Now, we have to take this with a grain of salt. You can't improve your situation if you have like a bad boss or a lot of stress, but it can improve your attitude toward work, which can go a long ways to improving job satisfaction. What about at college? This was a study designed where they had three classrooms, and they taught beginning psychology and sociology classes in these classrooms. They had two groups. The control group did not have plants in the classroom. For the second group, they were in the same classroom, but they put houseplants again throughout the classroom. They found that instructor evaluations went up in particular categories. So those individuals taking these beginning classes rated the instructor higher in such categories as finding the class more challenging and stimulating. These individuals had an increased interest in the subject matter as a result of the class, and they were more likely to learn more in the class. And this was all identified on these evaluations. So having these plants in the classroom made these students more receptive to the instructor. Now, it didn't translate into higher test scores, but they still felt that their interactions with the instructor was more beneficial in the category of those that were surrounded by plants. So, how does this translate into schooling? Well, they did a study in Taiwan that looked at middle school classes. Um, once again, classroom with plants versus classroom without plants. They found that these students rated their classrooms as being more friendly and welcoming if there were plants in the classroom. They reported fewer sick leave hours in the classrooms that had plants. And amazingly enough, the kids in these classrooms were less likely to misbehave. And they were less likely to be sent to the principal's office for misbehaving. So they were able to show this objectively. However, this did not improve test scores. But still, plants can do a lot in a classroom situation, particularly if you can reduce sick leave hours and you can have students that are less likely to misbehave. Now, this is one of my favorite studies because it comes from a hospital situation. And Ulrich here is a researcher that looked at gallbladder patients in one hospital. He looked at several years worth of gallbladder patients, and he was able to identify which hospital rooms they were in. One set of gallbladder patients were in hospital rooms that looked at a brick wall. Another set of gallbladder patients looked out over the courtyard and were able to see trees. Um, so he went and read all of their hospital patient records. Now they had similar procedures. They were all gallbladder surgeries, and there's a pretty standardized protocol for gallbladder surgery. But he wanted to see, did the records reveal any differences? And they did. So the set of patients that looked at a brick wall had more negative notations in the record. And what this means is that the nurses would make notes, and the notes would say, okay, patient was crying, or patient was experiencing pain, or may have been a little anxious or depressed. And there were more of these negative notations among the patients that looked at a brick wall. Now, the other set of patients, fewer negative notations, but something miraculous was shown through this study. The set of patients that looked out over the courtyard with the beautiful trees, they took fewer painkillers. And if they took a painkiller, it was more likely to be something like, Advil or ibuprofen, um, rather than a heavy narcotic. And in addition, they had shorter hospital stays. So, I mean, this is amazing information. Now, a more recent study showed um, that if you have 8 to 12 plants in your hospital room, the patients that have this view of plants in their room are more likely to recover from surgery faster. And once again, these were standard surgeries like appendectomy and thyroid surgery. They took fewer pain relievers. They had lower blood pressure than their counterparts that were not surrounded by plants, and they reported less pain and fatigue. All right, so what are you all going to do when you have family and friends in the hospital? Hopefully you're going to send them plants. Let's talk about breast cancer patients. Breast cancer patients are frequently overwhelmed because they have to make a lot of decisions after they're diagnosed. They have to, make decisions um, about their treatment. They're probably trying to tie up some things at home before they're going in for surgery. So they're more likely to experience what we call attentional fatigue because they have to make all these decisions. Now, in this study, what they did was they asked breast cancer patients before and after surgery to spend time at a botanic garden. So spend 2 hours a week, walking through the garden. And they found these breast cancer patients were more clear headed, they had more concentration on various tasks, and they had less decision fatigue. Now, the studies I talked about, these were more passive experiences. So people that were exposed to views or surrounded by plants. Even better is when you can actively garden. Um, and with these studies, they showed that gardeners, particularly those in higher ages, scored higher in all major health indices. They were shown to have more hand strength. And this is really important for senior citizens. We lose our hand strength as we get a little bit older. But if we can keep active, if we can still dig in the dirt with a hand trowel, if we can prune plants, we're more likely to have this really important hand strength as we get older. Um, Nursing home residents that garden are more likely to be social and engaged in their nursing home communities versus those that don't garden. And then when we look at dementia and Alzheimer's patients, if they are engaged in simple gardening activities, they're more likely to report increased functioning. So we want to continue to be surrounded by plants. We want to continue to be active and garden even as we get older. But there's certainly some obstacles. For example, as we get older, we may have carpal tunnel. In fact, I have to admit right now I am experiencing some hand pain for the last 6 weeks. I hit 50 recently, and I swear that's when the hand pain started. I mean, it's kind of funny. Other challenges we may have back pain, and then we have some individuals that may be in wheelchairs. So how can we continue to realize health benefits and still garden? We can definitely garden outdoors, but we can garden outdoors too. And we can overcome some of these barriers to gardening. And I'm going to talk about some things we can do because we want to continue to have sensory stimulation from gardening indoors and outdoors, and we want to continue being physically active. Now, if you happen to be in a wheelchair, there's lots of different things that we can do. Now, this happens to be a garden that is designed to be accessible for people in wheelchairs. So now this is at NDSU, and you can see we've got these U-shaped bays, so people can just roll up in their wheelchairs and pull weeds in this garden, or plant and do fun activities. Now, you don't have to plant something this elaborate to garden. You can garden in your home in a raised garden bed. And this happens to be my newest bed. It's since been filled with soil, and we grew plants in it last summer. But the nice thing is that I don't have to bend over to garden anymore. So with this raised garden bed, we plant plants in there, and we're able to harvest without really experiencing any back pain. Um, Now, as you build your garden beds, maybe you can include areas, or you can include a bench in the area. Um, Here, our garden bed happens to be sturdy enough that I can sit on the edge of it and garden, but you can certainly use a bucket and pull that up next to a raised garden bed. The important to think about is how wide is your raised garden bed. The average individual can reach 2 feet across without having pain. um, so keep that in mind. If you can access your garden bed from both sides, it can be 4 feet across. If you can only access your garden bed from one side, then you want to plan it so it's no more than 2 feet across. So hopefully that's making sense. Um, Now, if you're not into building your own garden bed, you can certainly buy a garden trough. And one of my friends at NDSU, he wanted his wife to continue gardening in their new home, so they bought these watering troughs. Now, he did drill holes in the bottom to allow drainage, and then he put them up on blocks so they would be at the right height for his wife. As you can see, she has put some trellises across there, and she can also stretch plastic across there so they have a little bit of a greenhouse effect in spring as they're starting off with some early vegetables. Other possibilities for gardening outdoors and may work with wheelchair patients is using these types of tables. And you can see that you can pair it with a stool. Now, the table on the right hand side is meant to be used by somebody with a wheelchair. So you can wheel up to it and you can put your legs underneath the table and get up really close with the wheelchair. Um, Now, some of you may would rather go vertical. So they do sell different gardening kits that allow you to stand and garden, or you can try and trellis it like we have on the right-hand side. This is how we were growing tomatoes for a particular project at NDSU. It also allows us to plant more tomatoes in a given area because they're growing upright as opposed to taking up a lot of space. Just different ideas for trellising. Now, this was kind of interesting. I found this on Pinterest. Now, this is only going to work when you have gardens that have, or when you're growing plants that have a shallow root system. Here you notice that they're on a slant, which allows excess water to drain off. Now we've got a picture here of a wheelbarrow garden. So this is kind of nice because, if you can move it around or you can just, bring it up to the house. Container gardening is great for people of all different levels. You can, have a big container, or you can have small ones that are on crates here to raise them up. But we're seeing more and more container gardening, and it's popular with all ages because we have less and less room for large gardens. So next, we're going to talk about ergonomic tools. So ergonomic tools are designed to minimize stress that you have on the body. And I'll show you all different kinds of tools. This is a walk behind planter, and this minimizes stress on people's backs. So you don't have to bend over to plant seeds. So there's all kinds of walk behind planters now, but they do tend to be a little on the expensive side. To minimize the amount of time that you spend bending over in your garden and seeding, instead, you can create seed tape. So, seed tape can be made. You can use newspaper here, you can use toilet paper. But what you do is you create a glue. You could use like a flour and water solution. So, like flour that you use for baking cakes and such, you can use the flour, mix it up with a little bit of water, and then use that to glue seed onto a strip of paper. And then you can just place that in the garden and cover it with soil. But it minimizes the amount of time that you are spending laboriously planting each individual seed. You can just unroll a strip of seed tape and cover it. Now, you don't have to make your own seed tape. They're selling more seed tape commercially too. You can use power tools. This happens to be an auger that will attach to a drill. So you can take your electric drill and then drill holes. You can plant bulbs, or you can even use it if you're planting annuals, in the garden, whether ornamental or edible. But you can just plant each hole and using the power of an electric drill. Now, don't forget to use long-handled tools because long-handled tools provide leverage. You're using the weight of your body to dig, and you're having to use less force to do so. Um, Now, I like to use a sharpened shovel that seems to cut into the soil a little bit easier. Some people like the root slayer. So this is a tool that's supposed to help, sever root systems and such, but you can see it's got that serrated edge on the side. So they're starting to design more and more tools. You don't have to use as much labor in your gardens. Um, Now for weeding, I like to use the stirrup hoe on the left-hand side. I have to admit, my family has been a big proponent of the stirrup hoe. As opposed to bending over and weeding, we just use the stirrup hoe in the garden, and it does a really nice job. For those of you that like to hand weed, um, The hand hoe on the right hand side is really sharp and makes fast work of weeding. So we want to spend less time weeding and more time enjoying the garden. And that's a positive thing. One of my favorite tools is the Hori Hori knife. As you can see, it's well loved and it's always covered in soil. Um, Now, the nice thing is it's a multi-purpose tool. You can see one side has a sharp straight edge, the other side has more of a serrated edge. So I use this to cut a lot of different things, but you can also use this in place of a hand trowel, and you can also measure how deep you're planting something with that nice ruler there. So tools make our lives a lot easier. Um, Now, do you have hand pain or does your hand go numb from carpal tunnel? They're designing tools to help you. Um, Now, these tools have that nice curved handle, and the purpose of having that curved handle is so that you can maintain a neutral position with your wrist. You don't have to be bending your wrist as you dig. Now, I happen to have the tools that I'm showing here that are ergonomic. So I could actually send these tools to Kelsey sometime if she has a function this coming summer, so you can try out some of these tools and see how they feel in your hand. So hopefully we can all be meeting up in the summer, but I'd be happy to share these tools with Kelsey and she could kind of have a demonstration of them. There are pistol grip tools. So this is also another tool that you maintain kind of that neutral hand position. Really nice, if you've got arthritis in your wrist and have troubles gripping things. Um, to make this a little bit easier, there is an arm support. And you can see how that just helps. You don't really have to be holding the weight of the tool. Your arm helps support it. For individuals in wheelchairs or having to reach a little bit further, they've got these long reach tools. So you can see we really can continue to garden as we get older, or as we encounter physical difficulties. Okay, what if you're having trouble seeing? I have to admit, I lose my hand tools from time to time in the garden. What you can do is you can wrap your hand tools with garden wrap, and you can choose these fluorescent colors to make it a little easier to find your hand tools. Other guides or other things that can help us as we are in the garden is you can find stools. I like this stool because it has a couple of different functions. If you need to kneel, um, you can flip it over, and then you've got this nice pad for kneeling on the ground. But if you need a little help getting up, you've got these railings, and then if you flip it over, you can sit on it. So kind of some fun things that make gardening a little easier for us. All right, so at this time I would be happy to take some questions.
What kind of plant do you find the easiest to grow? A flower plant that's really easy to grow or the easiest to grow.
I like zinnias, to tell you the truth, for ornamental gardening. These are annuals to grow. I like the Profusion series because they are bred to have fewer diseases. So that's one thing we worry about. Some of our plants may be covered in powdery mildew. Rather than treating it, what I like to do is I like to choose plants that are are hardy plants that will not be subject to diseases. So like the Zinnia Profusion series is a nice one. Other easy plants, some of the marigolds are fun. It's really kind of what you like. Snapdragons are a nice one to include too. But I mean, there's really a ton of different annuals. Now at NDSU, I work with Barb Lashkowitz. She's our garden manager, and she trials hundreds and hundreds of annuals each year to see which ones are easy to grow, because we don't want to waste our money on plants that don't grow as well. Um, so, go ahead and Google our NDSU um, garden trials, and you'll find that we've got a whole report on different annuals that grow well in North Dakota and can take our winds and are disease resistant. So great question. And I see Laura in the chat box has said, on the other hand, there's something very therapeutic about pulling weeds, the feel when the root lets loose. Yes, there's definitely something therapeutic about pulling weeds. I have to tell you, I observed this in my father. I thought my father was crazy because he would spend hours in the backyard pulling weeds out of the lawn. I'm like, why don't you just spray the lawn and just get it over and done with? But I didn't realize I had to grow up and experience stress in the workplace to understand what he was doing was that he was just pulling those weeds, and that was his stress release. So Peggy, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the information on raised garden beds. And then Alice has a comment on her daughter gave her a chamomile herb growing kit for Christmas. It's recommended to not start growing these indoors until we have more sun around March. And Ellis, yes, that would be a good time to start your chamomile herbs. Yeah, I mean, you don't want them too big and leggy before you plant them. And in March, we're more likely to have more sun exposure. So yes, that sounds like a good time to start your chamomile herb. I have to admit, I drink a lot of chamomile tea. It does seem to be soothing um, and it's also very tasty. So that's a nice one. I like the flowers. The flowers are little dainty daisies. And then Deb likes the trough idea. I have to admit, I want to buy some troughs, some more troughs too. My husband's trying to slow me down because he's afraid I'm going to get overcommitted and have way too many gardens to maintain. But I'm thinking about buying some more troughs to expand the garden area that we have. And Laura likes the benefit of having views of the outdoor and plants in hospitals. You're going to start seeing more research on that. The research has only just begun. A lot of the research we're seeing it's from other countries. So they've had more grants to fund this type of research, but we're seeing that plants can really help keep us healthy. you know um, but there's going to be differences. There's one thing about viewing nature. Is it even more benefit if we're actively participating in the garden, because then we have the benefit of watching the plants grow and taking pride in what we're growing. So I wouldn't be surprised that there's a whole nother set of health benefits from not just watching our gardens, but the amount of pride and the interaction that we have with the garden.
Esther, I was going to ask you, as far as your tools that you have on there,
Mhm.
were those bought locally or did you order those online? And Laura, if you want to jump on too, I don't know, does Plant Perfect carry quite a few of the ergonomic tools?
And I'll just answer that I did purchase those online. I didn't
Okay.
see them available, but I wouldn't be surprised that we start seeing more of those tools. And I mean, I have these all in a tote. I'd be happy to send them to you, Kelsey. Once you're open more for business. If you have a field day or if you um, have garden tours or something, I'd be happy to send them so that people can actually feel them and see. Now, I have to admit, they are expensive. I'm hoping they will come down in price um, in the future.
Perfect. And if people didn't see, Laura, she's a master gardener who also works at Plant Perfect, and she said she does believe they carry ergonomic tools. So if some of you guys are looking, good place to stop. Does anybody else have any questions for Esther? I think I counted out of the participants that were on, and I think a couple maybe dropped off closer to 11 here, but I had almost all the participants that are in the Window Box Wellness Program on today. So that's great to see, and it's great for the additionals that came on.
Fantastic. So I think this is going to be a great program, and you're very lucky. Kelsey is very innovative, so you're very lucky to have Kelsey as your extension agent. So if you haven't met her, I'm hoping you'll get a chance to interact with her. She's a great resource for your counties.
Thank you for that, Esther. If we don't have any other questions, I guess I would just thank everybody for attending today, especially those of you who are in the program currently going on. I will tell you too, I've had a couple of you guys are definitely go-getters that already sent some letters for your pen pals. So that was great to come back into the Burley office. I was in Morton the last 2 days. So it was good to come back and see some letters that we can already start funneling. But if there aren't any more questions, I will go ahead and thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Esther, for the excellent presentation. And those of you in the program, I will be sending out an email early February for our next Zoom check-in. Have a great day to everybody attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you. Say hi to Dallas for me.
I will. And you'll be excited that I visited with you.